He thought she left out of resentment, until he met a little girl in a hospital who had his eyes. Daniel Reeves had always believed that clarity was the greatest form of strength. It was what allowed him to build an empire from the ground up, to make decisions others hesitated over, to walk away from situations that felt inefficient or emotionally complicated. As the CEO of a multinational company and a self-made millionaire, he lived in a world governed by structure and intention, where every outcome was the result of planning rather than chance. People admired that about him. Some feared it. Very few truly knew him. Daniel's life was filled with movement. Airports, boardrooms, contracts signed with steady hands and unreadable expressions. His days were scheduled down to the minute, his nights often spent in hotel rooms that all looked the same no matter the country. He told himself this was freedom, that independence meant never having to slow down for anyone else's needs. And he was absolutely certain of one thing: he had no children. It wasn't a denial or a defensive thought. It was simply a fact he had never had reason to question. There were no missed calls, no letters, no unexpected truths waiting to confront him. His past relationships had ended cleanly, without loose ends that followed him into the present. He believed that if something so significant had existed, he would have known. Years earlier, when Emily Carter had left, he hadn't chased her. He remembered that day clearly, though he rarely allowed himself to linger on it. She had stood near the window of his apartment, the city glowing behind her, her brown hair loose around her shoulders. There was something different in her eyes that evening, something heavier than disappointment, but Daniel had been too distracted to notice. His phone buzzed constantly with messages about an upcoming international deal, one that would define the next stage of his career. Emily spoke softly, choosing her words carefully, as if she were afraid of saying the wrong thing. Daniel interpreted her tone as resignation, as acceptance of the reality he offered her. He explained, calmly and confidently, that work demanded his attention, that travel was unavoidable, that this was simply the life he was building. She listened without interrupting. When she finally spoke, all she said was that she understood. Daniel had taken that as closure. He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't ask why her voice trembled just slightly at the end. He kissed her forehead, promised to call when things settled, and walked out believing that some relationships ended not because of failure, but because they no longer fit the plan. Emily disappeared from his life quietly after that. No dramatic confrontation. No accusations. Just silence. Over time, Daniel filled that silence easily. Success has a way of dulling regret. He climbed higher, earned more, and surrounded himself with people who praised his discipline and ambition. When colleagues asked about his personal life, he answered vaguely, saying he had chosen focus over family, as if it were a conscious and admirable sacrifice. Sometimes, late at night, when exhaustion softened his defenses, he wondered what Emily was doing. He imagined her happy, perhaps married, living a life that didn't require waiting for someone who was never fully present. That image reassured him. If she was happy, then leaving had been the right decision for both of them. He never considered another possibility. Daniel believed that certainty protected him from regret. He believed that knowing exactly where he stood meant there were no hidden truths waiting to upend his life. He trusted logic over intuition, evidence over emotion, control over vulnerability. What he didn't know was that certainty built on assumptions can collapse without warning. And as he prepared to step into a children's hospital years later, surrounded by cameras and formal smiles, Daniel Reeves had no idea that the one truth he had never questioned was about to be undone by a single moment he could never forget. Emily Carter did not expect the truth to arrive so quietly. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden fear, only a subtle sense that something was different long before she allowed herself to name it. Her body felt unfamiliar in small ways at first, a lingering tiredness that sleep didn't fix, a nausea that came and went without warning, a heaviness that settled into her chest when she tried to ignore it. She told herself it was stress, the aftershock of a breakup she hadn't fully processed, the cost of suddenly being alone. The confirmation came on a gray morning that looked no different from any other. Emily stood in the bathroom of her small apartment, the light too harsh, the air too still, staring down at something that instantly changed the meaning of everything that came before it. She sat on the edge of the bathtub for a long time, her thoughts moving slower than her heartbeat, trying to understand how the world could feel so unchanged while her own life had already split into a before and an after. Her first instinct was to tell Daniel. The thought came with painful clarity, followed immediately by a knot of fear that tightened in her stomach. She knew him too well to imagine an easy conversation. Daniel would return, she was sure of that, but not because he wanted to rebuild something with her. He would return because it was the right thing to do, because responsibility was a language he understood fluently. The idea of being tied to him by obligation rather than choice felt unbearable. Emily booked the doctor's appointment alone. The clinic was small and impersonal, filled with quiet murmurs and the sound of pages turning. When the doctor confirmed the pregnancy, Emily nodded as if she had expected it all along. She listened carefully to instructions and timelines, asking practical questions while carefully avoiding the emotional ones. She thanked the doctor, walked back to her car, and sat there gripping the steering wheel until her hands began to ache. That was where the fear finally reached her. She cried silently, not out of panic, but out of the weight of what she now carried. A life growing inside her, dependent on choices she had not yet made. She thought again of Daniel, of his certainty, of how easily he moved through the world without pausing for emotional complications. She imagined telling him, imagined his expression hardening into focus, already calculating solutions before asking how she felt. That image settled something inside her. Emily did not want to be solved. She did not want her future or her child's life to become another problem Daniel managed efficiently. She wanted love to exist freely or not at all. That night, she wrote him a message and erased it. Then she wrote another, longer this time, explaining carefully, honestly, what was happening. She read it over several times, feeling the weight of each word, then deleted that one too. No version of the truth felt right when spoken into a space where she feared it would be reshaped into obligation. Days turned into weeks, and her silence became a decision. Emily began preparing quietly. She adjusted her routines, found a new apartment closer to medical care, reduced expenses without complaint, and accepted that her life would soon revolve around someone else entirely. She told one close friend, choosing support over isolation, and learned to accept help without shame. Each small step forward strengthened her resolve, even as uncertainty lingered in the background. At night, she lay awake with one hand resting on her stomach, speaking softly to the life inside her. She promised safety. She promised honesty. She promised that even if the world became difficult, this child would never doubt being wanted. There were moments when doubt crept in, whispering that Daniel deserved to know, that keeping the truth from him might one day feel like betrayal. Emily wrestled with that fear often, turning it over again and again until it dulled into something manageable. She reminded herself that she was not taking anything away from him. She was choosing not to demand something he had never offered freely. Emily understood that her choice would shape years to come, not just for herself, but for a child who would one day ask questions she might not yet know how to answer. Still, she trusted her instincts more than logic in this moment, believing that love should never begin as an obligation. She did not know how the future would unfold. She only knew that whatever lay ahead, she would face it without forcing anyone else to choose her out of duty rather than desire. The months that followed tested Emily in ways she had never imagined, reshaping her sense of strength and vulnerability at the same time. Pregnancy was not the gentle, glowing experience she had once pictured in abstract thoughts. It was demanding, unpredictable, and often isolating. Her body changed quickly, sometimes painfully, and each new symptom reminded her that she was carrying more than just fear or hope. She was carrying responsibility. Doctor visits became anchors in her weeks, moments when time slowed and reality became unavoidable. She learned the language of measurements, dates, and medical terms, absorbing information with quiet focus. Each appointment ended with reassurance that everything was progressing normally, and each time she walked out with relief mixed with a deeper, unspoken anxiety. Normal did not mean easy. Normal did not mean she felt prepared. As her belly grew, the world around her seemed to move on without noticing. People rushed past her on the street, absorbed in their own lives, unaware that her entire existence had shifted inward. She continued working, though with less energy, often forcing herself through days when fatigue pressed so heavily that even standing felt difficult. Still, she persisted, driven by the knowledge that independence was no longer just a preference, but a necessity. At night, when the city quieted and exhaustion finally allowed her to rest, Emily lay awake listening to her own breathing. She placed her hand on her stomach and spoke softly, sometimes aloud, sometimes only in her thoughts. She talked about the life she hoped to build, about safety and warmth, about the promise that this child would never feel unwanted. Those moments felt intimate and grounding, anchoring her to something solid when doubt threatened to overwhelm her. Daniel crossed her mind often, especially during moments of weakness. She imagined him in distant cities, focused and confident, unaware of the life forming quietly beyond his reach. There were nights when she almost convinced herself to call him, to break the silence and release herself from the burden of secrecy. But every time, the same fear returned. She could not accept a future built on duty alone. She needed to know that if he ever stood beside her, it would be because he chose to, not because circumstances forced his hand. As the pregnancy progressed, complications arose that forced her to slow down further. Episodes of dizziness and sudden fatigue sent her to the emergency room more than once, where bright lights and hurried voices heightened her anxiety. Each time, doctors urged rest, patience, and caution. Emily listened, adjusting her life yet again, surrendering pieces of independence she once took for granted. The emotional weight grew heavier with time. She missed companionship, missed having someone to share the smallest moments with, from hearing a heartbeat for the first time to feeling the first unmistakable movement beneath her skin. She leaned on her friend for support, accepting help she once would have refused, learning that strength did not always mean doing everything alone. When labor began earlier than expected, fear washed over her in a sudden, overwhelming wave. The drive to the hospital felt endless, every contraction pulling her further from certainty and closer to something unknown. She focused on breathing, on staying present, on trusting herself and the medical team around her. Pain blurred her sense of time, stretching moments into something unrecognizable. When her daughter was finally placed in her arms, everything else faded. She stared down at the small face framed by dark hair, at eyes that would one day be unmistakably green, and felt a love so immediate and fierce that it left her breathless. Tears streamed freely, not from pain, but from the sudden understanding that nothing she had feared mattered in this moment. This life was real. This connection was undeniable. Emily named her Lily. In the quiet hours after delivery, as the hospital room dimmed and the world outside continued without pause, Emily held her daughter close and felt a deep, settling calm. She thought briefly of Daniel, of the truth he still did not know, and felt the familiar ache return. But it no longer felt paralyzing. She made herself a promise in that quiet room. She would protect Lily, even if that meant carrying difficult truths alone. She would build a life rooted in honesty, stability, and love, regardless of how complicated the past might become. And as Lily slept against her chest, Emily understood with absolute clarity that whatever lay ahead, she would face it not as someone abandoned, but as someone who had chosen courage in the absence of certainty. The first years of Lily's life unfolded with a rhythm that was both exhausting and strangely grounding. Emily learned quickly that motherhood did not allow much space for reflection in the beginning. Days were filled with feedings, sleepless nights, and constant vigilance, while emotions were pushed aside simply to get through the next hour. Lily was a calm baby for the most part, but she was observant in a way that often surprised Emily, watching faces closely as if trying to understand the world before fully entering it. Emily returned to work sooner than she should have, driven by necessity rather than readiness. She found a position that allowed flexible hours, though flexibility often meant working late into the night once Lily finally slept. There were moments when exhaustion blurred everything together, when Emily stood in the kitchen holding a bottle and couldn't remember how long she had been there. Still, she adapted, learning how to function through fatigue that became a permanent background presence in her life. Money was always tight. Every expense was calculated, every purchase questioned. Emily learned to distinguish between what was truly necessary and what could wait indefinitely. She became resourceful, finding comfort not in abundance but in stability, in knowing that Lily was safe, fed, and loved. That knowledge carried her through days when doubt crept in quietly, usually in the early hours of the morning when the world felt unbearably still. As Lily grew into a toddler, her personality began to emerge clearly. She was curious, serious, and unusually perceptive, often studying people before warming to them. Her green eyes missed very little, and Emily sometimes felt as though her daughter understood more than she could express. Lily asked questions early, not just about objects and sounds, but about people, about where they came from and why they left. Emily answered carefully, choosing honesty without burden, simplicity without lies. "He's a good man," she said whenever Lily asked about her father. "He just doesn't know about us." It was the truth, and it hurt every time she said it. Life slowly settled into something that resembled stability. Emily moved to a slightly larger apartment closer to medical care and childcare facilities. She found a better job with regular hours, one that offered health insurance and a sense of security she hadn't allowed herself to hope for before. The days became more predictable, though never easy. There were illnesses, sudden fevers in the middle of the night, and moments of fear that left Emily shaking as she waited in emergency rooms, Lily's small hand gripping hers tightly. Those hospital visits became familiar, not dramatic, but necessary. Vaccinations, checkups, minor complications that required observation. Emily hated those corridors, the sterile smell, the quiet tension that filled the waiting rooms. Still, she faced each visit with controlled calm, knowing that fear helped no one. Lily trusted her completely, and Emily carried that responsibility with unwavering determination. As the years passed, Lily's resemblance to Daniel became impossible to ignore. Strangers commented on her dark hair and striking green eyes, sometimes remarking how she looked like someone famous. Emily smiled politely and changed the subject, though each comment stirred something unsettled inside her. She had long accepted that this resemblance would one day raise questions she could not avoid forever. There were nights when Emily allowed herself to imagine an alternate reality. One where Daniel had known from the beginning, where decisions had been made together, where Lily had grown up with both parents present. Those thoughts were dangerous, and Emily learned to stop them before they took hold. Regret was a luxury she could not afford. The past was fixed. The present demanded her full attention. Despite everything, there were moments of genuine happiness. Quiet mornings when Lily climbed into her bed with a book, afternoons spent in the park watching her daughter discover the world with cautious wonder, evenings filled with laughter over simple meals. Emily learned to cherish those moments deeply, understanding how fragile and precious they were. By the time Lily turned 3, Emily felt stronger than she ever had before. Not because life had become easier, but because she had learned how to endure without losing herself. She believed, with a calm certainty, that she had done the right thing, that protecting her daughter had mattered more than easing her own loneliness. What Emily did not know was that the carefully built balance of her life was approaching a moment of collision. That the hospital she had come to see as a place of routine and necessity would soon become the setting for a truth neither she nor Daniel could escape. And when that moment arrived, it would force both of them to confront everything they thought they understood about choice, sacrifice, and love. The hospital visit that changed everything was meant to be routine, one more task in a long list of responsibilities Emily had learned to manage without hesitation. Lily had been unusually quiet that morning, her small hand warm in Emily's as they walked through the automatic doors, the familiar scent of disinfectant greeting them like an unwelcome memory. Vaccination days were never easy, but Emily had grown skilled at hiding her own anxiety, knowing Lily took cues from every breath and expression. They checked in at the reception desk, Emily answering questions automatically while Lily leaned against her leg, studying the room with serious, observant eyes. The waiting area was busy but subdued, filled with parents murmuring softly to restless children. Emily guided Lily to a chair, pulled a small toy from her bag, and whispered reassurances she had repeated many times before. She did not notice Daniel at first. He arrived with quiet confidence, dressed impeccably, accompanied by hospital administrators and doctors who spoke to him with visible respect. His presence subtly shifted the atmosphere of the corridor, drawing glances and straightened postures. Emily remained focused on Lily, unaware that the past had just stepped into the same space she occupied. Daniel was there to finalize a sponsorship agreement. He had funded entire wings before, donated without personal involvement, believing that generosity worked best at a distance. This time, however, he had been persuaded to attend in person, to shake hands, to smile for photographs, to be seen. He walked through the corridor with polite detachment, listening to explanations he had heard countless times before. Then he saw her. Recognition struck him slowly at first, like a memory surfacing through fog. Emily looked different, older in a way that spoke of endurance rather than time. Her posture was steady, protective, her attention fixed entirely on the child beside her. Daniel slowed without realizing it, his gaze drawn to something about the scene that felt unsettlingly familiar. Lily looked up. Her green eyes met his, sharp and unguarded, studying him with the same seriousness Emily had learned to recognize. Something in Daniel's chest tightened painfully. The color of those eyes was unmistakable. He had seen that reflection in mirrors his entire life. Emily sensed the shift before she saw him. Years of vigilance had sharpened her instincts, and she looked up abruptly, her breath catching the moment she recognized Daniel standing just a few steps away. For a split second, neither of them moved. The noise of the hospital faded into the background, replaced by a silence heavy with unspoken history. "Emily," Daniel said quietly, disbelief threading through his voice. She stood slowly, instinctively drawing Lily closer, though not hiding her. "Daniel." His gaze dropped to the child again, confusion giving way to something deeper, more dangerous. Questions crowded his expression, each one forming before he was ready to ask. "How old is she?" he managed. 3, Emily replied, her voice steady despite the sudden storm inside her. The number hit him with brutal clarity. 3 years. 3 years of a life he had never known existed. His eyes returned to Lily, who continued to watch him without fear, her small fingers gripping Emily's coat. "This is Lily," Emily said softly. "We're here for her vaccination." Daniel's breath caught. The truth arranged itself in his mind without invitation, pieces snapping together into a picture he could no longer deny. His certainty, so carefully protected for years, shattered quietly in that sterile corridor. "She's mine," he said, not as a question, but as a realization. Emily did not argue. She nodded once. Lily looked between them, sensing the gravity of the moment without understanding it. "Mom," she asked softly, "who is he?" Emily swallowed. "Someone important," she answered, choosing the truth without burden. Daniel lowered himself to Lily's level, ignoring the eyes on him, the administrators waiting in confusion nearby. "Hi," he said gently. "I'm Daniel." Lily considered him carefully, then nodded. "I'm Lily." That simple exchange broke something open inside him. In that moment, surrounded by hospital walls and years of silence, Daniel understood that the life he believed had moved on without him had never disappeared. It had simply grown beyond his awareness. And nothing in his carefully controlled world would ever be the same again. The days after the hospital encounter unfolded with an intensity that neither Emily nor Daniel could fully prepare for. What had been a single moment of recognition quickly expanded into something far more complex, layered with years of silence, misunderstanding, and choices that could no longer be undone. Daniel did not disappear after that day, and that alone unsettled Emily more than she expected. She had braced herself for shock, anger, even denial, but not for persistence marked by restraint. Daniel called the next evening, his voice careful, asking if he could see Lily again. He did not demand answers or explanations, and he did not ask to be forgiven for what he did not yet understand. He asked for time. Emily hesitated longer than she meant to, weighing the risk of opening a door she had kept closed for so long. In the end, she agreed to meet at a nearby park, a place Lily loved and felt safe. When Daniel arrived, he came alone. That detail mattered. Emily noticed everything now, the absence of assistance, the lack of urgency in his movements, the way he stood slightly apart at first, allowing Lily to decide whether to approach. Lily watched him from behind the swing set, her green eyes serious, curious, unafraid. She did not run to him, but she did not hide either. Slowly, she walked closer, stopping a few steps away. "You came," she said simply. "Yes," Daniel replied, lowering himself to her level. "I said I would." That small exchange lingered with Emily long after the afternoon ended. Daniel did not try to impress Lily. He listened to her stories, clumsy and half-formed, and laughed at the right moments without exaggeration. He asked permission before pushing her on the swing and stepped back when Emily signaled it was time to go. There were no promises, no claims, no attempt to redefine their roles too quickly. Trust, Emily realized, was being built not through emotion, but through consistency. Still, the nights were difficult. Emily lay awake replaying conversations, questioning her own reactions, wondering whether she was protecting Lily or herself. She had learned to survive by control, by anticipating every possible outcome, and Daniel's presence threatened that balance. Hope was dangerous. It had a way of making old wounds ache. Daniel, for his part, struggled with the weight of realization. Every quiet moment reminded him of what he had missed. He saw Lily's face everywhere now, in reflections, in memories that suddenly made sense. He questioned his past with a clarity that bordered on cruelty, replaying moments with Emily and recognizing signs he had ignored. The certainty he once relied on felt fragile, almost dishonest in hindsight. He began visiting the hospital regularly, not as a sponsor, but as a volunteer when his schedule allowed. He learned the names of nurses, listened to stories he had never stayed long enough to hear before, and watched parents move through fear and hope side by side. The experience grounded him in a way success never had. Weeks passed, and Lily began asking questions. "Why do you come see me?" she asked one afternoon as they sat on a bench watching ducks gather near the water. Daniel paused, choosing honesty over simplicity. "Because I care about you," he said. "And because I want to be part of your life, if that's okay." Lily thought about that for a long moment. "Okay," she said finally, swinging her legs. "But you have to keep coming." "I will," he answered, aware that this was the only promise that mattered. Emily watched this exchange from a distance, her heart tight with emotion she did not fully trust yet. She saw the way Lily relaxed around him now, the way she reached for his hand without thinking, and it terrified her as much as it comforted her. Allowing Daniel closer meant risking disappointment not just for herself, but for her daughter. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Emily finally spoke the fear she had carried silently. "If you leave again," she said quietly, "it won't just be me you're leaving." Daniel did not interrupt. He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. "I know," he said. "And I won't pretend I can erase the past. But I'm not here to disappear." For the first time, Emily believed he understood what was at stake. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with conversations they had yet to have and truths that would take time to heal. But something had shifted between them, something grounded not in regret or obligation, but in presence. And as Lily slept peacefully in the next room, unaware of how profoundly her life had already changed, both Emily and Daniel understood that whatever came next would require courage neither of them had needed before. Because this time, the truth was no longer hidden. And walking away was no longer an option. The change did not arrive as a sudden resolution, nor did it erase the years that had already passed. It unfolded slowly, shaped by everyday choices that carried more meaning than any dramatic declaration ever could. Daniel became a constant presence in Lily's life, not by demanding a place, but by earning it through what he did when no one was watching. He adjusted his schedule quietly, declined invitations that once would have mattered more than anything else, and learned how to build his days around moments that could not be postponed. Lily noticed the difference before anyone named it. She began waiting by the window on certain afternoons, her face lighting up when Daniel appeared at the end of the street. She told him stories that wandered in every direction, trusting him with thoughts she shared with no one else. When she was tired or afraid, she reached for him instinctively, and each time she did, something inside Daniel settled into place with quiet certainty. Emily watched this transformation with a mix of gratitude and fear. She saw how naturally Daniel fit into Lily's world now, how easily he adapted to routines that once would have frustrated him. He did not challenge Emily's rules or try to reshape their lives around his preferences. Instead, he asked, listened, and learned. That humility softened parts of Emily she had kept guarded for years. There were difficult conversations they could no longer avoid. Late at night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Emily spoke about the loneliness she had carried, the nights she had cried silently, afraid of being too tired to wake up again. Daniel listened without interruption, his regret visible but controlled. He admitted his own failures, not as excuses, but as truths he could no longer ignore. Each conversation stripped away another layer of distance between them. Trust rebuilt itself slowly, unevenly, but honestly. There were moments of tension, misunderstandings that surfaced old fears, and days when Emily wondered if she was asking too much by hoping for stability. Daniel never disappeared during those moments. He stayed, even when it was uncomfortable, even when he had no answers. One afternoon, as they walked through the park, Lily stopped suddenly and looked up at Daniel with a seriousness that caught both adults off guard. "You're my dad," she said, not asking, but stating a fact. Daniel's breath caught. He looked at Emily, instinctively searching her face. She nodded once, her eyes shining. "Yes," he said softly. "I am." The word settled over them with a weight that felt both heavy and right. Daniel knelt and hugged Lily gently, careful not to overwhelm her, and she wrapped her arms around his neck without hesitation. Emily turned away briefly, overwhelmed by the sight of something she had once believed impossible. Life did not become perfect after that moment. There were still challenges, compromises, and fears that lingered beneath the surface. But the foundation had changed. Lily no longer lived in a world defined by absence. She had a father who showed up, who listened, who stayed. Months later, Daniel finalized the hospital sponsorship that had once been a formality. This time, it meant something different. It was no longer about reputation or responsibility. It was about gratitude, about recognizing the place where his life had collided with the truth he had never questioned. Sometimes people believe they are left because they were not loved enough. Sometimes they believe silence means indifference. In reality, silence can be an act of protection, and love can exist even in absence. Daniel had been wrong about many things. But he was given a second chance to be right. And this time, he chose to stay.